the bullet that shattered the window of the Bozeman, Montana telegraph office in the spring of 1882, missed Grace Morgan's head by 3 inches. And in that moment of sheer terror as glass rained down around her, she wondered if her impossible dreams would die with her before she ever had the chance to chase them. She dropped to the floor behind the counter, her heart hammering against her ribs as shouts erupted outside. The telegram she had been composing fell from her trembling fingers. The words "Request Admission Montana Women's Medical College" smudged by the sweat from her palms. Another shot rang out, this one farther down the street, followed by the thunder of hooves as riders tore through town. "Everyone stay down," Marshall Henderson's voice boomed from somewhere outside. Grace pressed herself against the wooden floor, breathing in the dust and trying to calm the shaking in her hands. This was the 3rd time this month that trouble had rolled through Bozeman like a storm, and she was growing weary of it. At 22 years old, she had spent the last 4 years working at the telegraph office, saving every spare penny and dreaming of a life beyond this violent, unpredictable town. She wanted to study medicine, to heal people, to make a difference. But the money never seemed to be enough, and Montana felt like a world away from the established medical colleges back east that might actually accept a woman. The shooting stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Grace waited, counting her heartbeats, until she heard the marshals all clear. Slowly, she pushed herself up from the floor, brushing splinters of glass from her dark blue dress. Her hands were still shaking. The door burst open, and she nearly screamed before recognizing the tall figure of Vincent Zimmerman. The cowboy worked at the largest ranch outside town, the Double Creek, and came into the telegraph office regularly to send messages for his boss. He was perhaps 25, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of summer grass that always seemed to carry a hint of kindness even when his expression was serious. "Miss Morgan, are you hurt?" He crossed the room in 3 long strides, his boots crunching on broken glass. "No, I'm fine." "Just startled." She tried to keep her voice steady, but it wavered despite her best efforts. Vincent's gaze swept over her, checking for injuries with the practiced eye of someone who had seen his share of trouble. His dark hair was dusty from the road, and there was a tension in his shoulders that suggested he had been ready to draw his gun if needed. "That bullet came too close. You should head home for the day. I have work to finish." Grace bent to retrieve the fallen telegram, but her hands were shaking so badly that she fumbled it. The paper drifted to the floor again. This time, Vincent picked it up. His eyes scanned the words before he could stop himself, and she saw something shift in his expression. "You want to be a doctor." Heat flooded Grace's cheeks. That telegram was private, her secret dream that she had been too embarrassed to share with anyone in Bozeman. People in town already thought she was odd for being unmarried at 22, for spending her free time reading medical texts borrowed from old Dr. Hartley, for having ambitions beyond finding a husband and raising children. It doesn't matter. She snatched the paper from his hand, crumpling it slightly in her grip. "It's impossible anyway." "Why impossible?" Vincent's voice was genuinely curious, not mocking. Grace laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Because medical schools barely accept women, and the ones that do require money I don't have. Because I would need to travel east, and I can't afford that either. Because everyone in this town thinks I'm foolish for even considering it. Take your pick." She expected him to agree, to tell her that a woman's place was in the home, to suggest she settle down like every other person who had offered their unwanted opinion over the years. Instead, Vincent leaned against the counter and said, "Those all sound like challenges, not impossibilities." "There's a difference," Grace asked bitterly. "Challenges can be solved. Impossibilities can't. He picked up a shard of glass from the counter and examined it thoughtfully. My boss, Mr. Crawford, he needs to send a telegram to his brother in Chicago. But while I'm here, why don't you tell me about this dream of yours? The whole thing, not just the impossible parts. Grace stared at him. In the 4 years she had known Vincent Zimmerman, they had exchanged pleasantries and conducted business, but never had a conversation that went deeper than the weather or the latest news. He was quiet, polite, and kept to himself mostly. She knew he was good at his job, that the other ranch hands respected him, and that he sent money regularly to someone back in Kansas, but little else. "Why do you care?" she asked. "Because someone just shot at you, and you're standing here talking about dreams being impossible instead of being grateful you're alive." He set down the glass shard. "Seems to me that if you survived that bullet, maybe your dreams deserve a second look too." Something in his words cracked the wall she had built around her disappointments. Grace smoothed out the crumpled telegram and took a shaky breath. "I want to study medicine. Real medicine at a proper school. I want to learn surgery and anatomy and pharmacology. I want to help people, especially women and children who don't always get the best care. Dr. Hartley has been teaching me what he can, but he's old and his methods are outdated, and he admits he can only take me so far." Vincent listened without interrupting, his green eyes focused on her face. "But medical school costs money I don't have," Grace continued, the words spilling out now. "I've been saving for 4 years, and I'm not even halfway to what I would need. And even if I had the money, most schools won't accept women. The Montana Women's Medical College is my best chance, but it's still expensive, and I would need to support myself while studying. And what if I go through all of that just to fail?" "What if you succeed?" Vincent asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them. Grace realized she had been so focused on all the obstacles that she had stopped letting herself imagine success. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've been afraid to hope for that." Vincent straightened from the counter. "What's one dream you could start with?" "Not the whole thing, just one piece of it." Grace frowned. "What do you mean? You've got this big dream that feels impossible because you're looking at the whole mountain. But what if you just looked at the first step? What's one thing you could do right now to move toward what you want?" She thought about it. "Dr. Hartley mentioned there's a medical conference in Helena next month. Doctors from all over Montana will be there, including someone from the Women's Medical College. If I could go, I could talk to them, learn more about the admission process, maybe make a connection." She shook her head. "But I can't leave the telegraph office for that long, and the train fare alone would take a chunk of my savings." "What if those problems got solved?" Vincent asked. "Would you go?" "Of course, but they won't just solve themselves. Let me work on it." He tipped his hat to her. "I need to send that telegram for Mr. Crawford, then I'll get out of your way." Grace wanted to argue to tell him not to bother, but something in his expression stopped her. He looked determined, like a man who had made up his mind about something and wouldn't be swayed. She conducted his business transaction in a daze, her mind still spinning from their conversation. After Vincent left, Grace spent the rest of the day sweeping up glass and trying to focus on work, but his words kept echoing in her mind. Let's start with just one dream. What if she did stop looking at the whole impossible mountain and focused on taking one step? The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. That evening, as she walked home to the small room she rented above the general store, she found herself actually imagining going to Helena, meeting real doctors, asking questions, learning. The possibility felt fragile, like spun sugar that would dissolve if she examined it too closely. But it was there nonetheless. 3 days later, Vincent returned to the telegraph office with a proposition that would change everything. Grace was sorting through messages when he walked in, his hat in his hands and an unusually nervous energy about him. "Miss Morgan, do you have a few minutes to talk?" "Of course." She set down the papers, curious about what had him so on edge. "I spoke with Mr. Crawford about your situation," Vincent began, and Grace's heart sank. She didn't want to be anyone's charity case, but he continued before she could protest. "His wife is organizing a trip to Helena for that medical conference. Apparently she's been wanting to attend some ladies' auxiliary meetings there, and when I mentioned you wanted to go for the medical talks, she insisted you travel with her. She'll cover the train fare and lodging if you'll act as her companion during the journey." Grace's mouth fell open. She would do that? But why? Mrs. Crawford had 3 sisters. 2 of them died in childbirth because the local doctor didn't know what he was doing. She's passionate about women getting proper medical training. Vincent's expression softened. She said any woman brave enough to pursue medicine deserves support. I don't know what to say. Grace felt tears prickling at her eyes. This was the chance she had been hoping for, handed to her like a gift. "Say you'll go," Vincent urged. "Mrs. Crawford leaves in 2 weeks. That gives you time to arrange things with your employer here." "Mr. Peterson will never give me the time off," Grace said, reality crashing back in. Her boss at the telegraph office was notoriously difficult about scheduling. "What if he had someone to cover for you?" Vincent leaned against the counter in that casual way of his. "I worked as a telegraph operator before I came to Montana. I'm rusty, but I could handle the basics for a few days." Grace stared at him in disbelief. "Why are you doing this?" Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his green eyes studying her face. "Because I watched my mother die when I was 16 because no doctor in our town knew how to stop her bleeding after she delivered my baby sister. The baby died too. And I've spent the last 9 years wondering if things would have been different if there had been someone around who actually knew medicine, who cared enough to learn proper techniques." His voice was rough with old pain. "You want to be that person for other families. That matters." The raw honesty in his words hit Grace like a physical force. She had been so caught up in her own struggles that she hadn't considered that others might have their own reasons for supporting her dream. "I'm so sorry about your mother and sister. It was a long time ago." But the grief in his eyes said it still felt fresh. "So will you go to Helena?" "Yes." The word came out as barely more than a whisper, but it felt like a shout of victory in her chest. "Yes, I'll go." Vincent's serious expression broke into a genuine smile, and Grace realized it was the first time she had seen him truly smile. It transformed his entire face, softening the hard lines and making him look younger. "Good. I'll let Mrs. Crawford know." Over the next 2 weeks, Grace threw herself into preparations. Mr. Peterson grumbled about her absence but grudgingly agreed when Vincent showed up to demonstrate his telegraph skills. Dr. Hartley was thrilled when she told him her plans and gave her a list of questions to ask the representatives from the Women's Medical College. Grace's landlady helped her press her best dress and loaned her a proper travel bag. The night before her departure, Grace was too excited to sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, watching moonlight stripe the ceiling, and thought about all the what-ifs. What if the college representatives encouraged her to apply? What if she found a way to make this work? What if her impossible dream wasn't so impossible after all? When she arrived at the train station the next morning, Mrs. Crawford was already there, a handsome woman in her 40s with kind eyes and an efficient manner. "Miss Morgan, how wonderful to finally meet you properly. Vincent has told me so much about your ambitions." "He has." Grace glanced around for the cowboy but didn't see him. "Oh yes, he's been quite insistent that we take good care of you in Helena." Mrs. Crawford smiled knowingly. "My husband says Vincent hasn't been this animated about anything since he started working at the ranch 3 years ago." Before Grace could process that interesting piece of information, Vincent himself appeared, carrying Mrs. Crawford's luggage. He had cleaned up for the occasion, wearing a pressed shirt and a vest that made him look less like a ranch hand and more like a gentleman. His dark hair was still damp from washing. "Good morning, Miss Morgan." He set down the bags and turned to her. "I hope you have a successful trip." "Thank you." Grace found herself suddenly shy, aware of how much this man had done for her in such a short time. "And thank you for everything else. For listening, for helping arrange this, for covering my work. I don't know how to repay you." "Come back and tell me what you learned," Vincent said simply. "That's payment enough." The train whistle blew, signaling imminent departure. Mrs. Crawford began organizing her bags with the help of a porter, giving Grace and Vincent a moment of relative privacy on the busy platform. "I'm nervous," Grace admitted. "That means it matters to you." Vincent reached out and squeezed her hand briefly, the gesture quick but warm. "You're going to do great things, Grace Morgan. I believe that." The use of her first name, the certainty in his voice, the warmth of his hand even after he had pulled away, all of it combined to make Grace's heart beat faster in a way that had nothing to do with nervousness about the trip. "All aboard," the conductor called. Grace hurried to join Mrs. Crawford on the train, settling into their compartment as the engine began to chug forward. She looked out the window and spotted Vincent on the platform, his hat back on his head, watching the train depart. He raised a hand in farewell, and she waved back, keeping her eyes on him until the train rounded a bend and Bozeman disappeared from view. "He's a good man, that one," Mrs. Crawford said, settling into her seat with a small smile. "My husband says Vincent is the most honest, hard-working person at the ranch. Never complains, never shirks his duties, sends most of his wages back to Kansas to support his father and younger brothers." Grace absorbed this new information, adding it to the growing picture she had of Vincent Zimmerman. "He never talks about himself much. No, he's private, but his actions speak loud enough." Mrs. Crawford pulled out some knitting from her bag. "He didn't have to go out of his way to help you, but he did. That says something about his character, and I suspect," she added with a meaningful look, "it says something about his feelings, too." Grace felt her cheeks warm. "We barely know each other." Sometimes that's when you see someone most clearly, without all the pretense and history clouding things. Mrs. Crawford's needles began to click rhythmically. "But I'll mind my own business. Tell me about these dreams of yours. I want to hear everything." The train ride to Helena took most of the day, winding through Montana's spectacular spring landscape. Mountains still capped with snow rose in the distance, and valleys greened with new growth spread beneath an impossibly blue sky. Grace told Mrs. Crawford about her interest in medicine, her years of informal study with Dr. Hartley, her fears and hopes about actual medical school. Mrs. Crawford listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions and sharing her own experiences with inadequate medical care on the frontier. "Women die out here from things that are preventable," she said quietly. "We need doctors who understand our bodies, who take our pain seriously. What you want to do is important, Miss Morgan. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." They arrived in Helena as the sun was setting, the city glowing gold in the fading light. It was larger than Bozeman, busier, with more brick buildings and paved streets. Mrs. Crawford had arranged rooms for them at a respectable hotel near the conference venue, and Grace spent her first night in Helena lying awake again, this time from excitement rather than anxiety. The medical conference began the next morning. Grace had worried she wouldn't be allowed in since she wasn't a doctor or a formal student, but Mrs. Crawford swept her through the doors with such confidence that no one questioned them. The main hall was filled with men in dark suits, their voices a low rumble of professional conversation, but Grace also spotted several women scattered through the crowd. "There," Mrs. Crawford pointed to a display table near the back. "That's the Montana Women's Medical College booth." Grace's heart hammered as she approached. Behind the table sat a woman perhaps in her mid-30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense air. A sign above her head read, "Dr. Sarah Bennett, Montana Women's Medical College. Good morning, Doctor." Bennett looked up from the pamphlets she was organizing. "Are you interested in medical education?" "Very much so." Grace launched into the questions she had prepared, asking about curriculum, admission requirements, costs, and whether the college could help with job placement after graduation. "Doctor." Bennett answered everything thoroughly, and as they talked, Grace felt a door opening in her mind. This was real. This was possible. "You have a solid foundation from your independent study," Dr. Bennett said after Grace had described her work with Dr. Hartley. "That will help. But I won't lie to you, Miss Morgan. Medical school is expensive and demanding. Many students drop out because they can't handle the workload or the financial burden." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Grace said firmly, "and I'll find a way to manage the finances, Doctor." Bennett studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe you will. Here." She handed Grace a thick packet of papers. "This is the application for our next class, which begins in September. Look it over carefully. We offer some scholarship opportunities for exceptional students, though they're competitive. If you decide to apply, I'd be happy to review your materials before you submit them officially." Grace clutched the packet like it was made of gold. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Over the next 2 days, Grace attended every lecture and discussion that would allow her. She learned about new surgical techniques, advances in germ theory, treatments for common frontier ailments. She met other aspiring female doctors, women who shared her passion and understood her struggles. She began to see herself not as an oddity, but as part of a movement, a wave of women pushing their way into a male-dominated field because their communities needed them. Mrs. Crawford attended her own meetings, but always made time to hear about Grace's day over dinner. "You're glowing," she observed on their last evening in Helena. "This trip has been good for you." "It has been everything I hoped for and more," Grace admitted. "I feel like I've been living in a small box, and suddenly someone has shown me there's a whole world outside it." "And what will you do with that knowledge?" Grace took a deep breath. "I'm going to apply to the medical college. I don't know how I'll afford it yet, but I'm going to try." "That's my girl." Mrs. Crawford raised her glass of water in a toast. "To dreams that aren't quite as impossible as they seemed." The return journey to Bozeman felt different. Grace spent the train ride reading through the application materials, making notes, calculating costs. The scholarship information was promising. If she could win one of those, and if she continued saving aggressively, and if she could find part-time work in Helena while studying, it might just be possible. It would be hard, but possible. She found herself thinking about Vincent frequently during the journey home. His words kept coming back to her. "Let's start with just one dream." Well, she had started, and that first step had opened up possibilities she hadn't dared imagine. She wanted to tell him everything, to share her excitement, to thank him again for pushing her to take this chance. When the train pulled into Bozeman Station, Grace spotted him immediately. Vincent was leaning against a post, his cowboy hat tilted against the afternoon sun, and when he saw her through the window, his face lit up with that rare smile that transformed him. Grace barely remembered saying goodbye to Mrs. Crawford. She hurried off the train, her travel bag bumping against her leg, and walked straight to Vincent. "It was incredible," she said before he could even greet her. The college is real and they want women students and there are scholarships, and I met actual female doctors, and I think I can do this, Vincent. I really think I can do this." His smile widened. "Tell me everything." They walked from the station together. Grace talking nonstop about the conference, the lectures, Dr. Bennett, the application process. Vincent listened with complete attention, asking questions, congratulating her on making connections, nodding at her plans. By the time they reached the general store where Grace lived, the sun was setting and her voice was hoarse from talking. "I'm sorry," she said with a laugh. "I haven't let you get a word in." "I like hearing you talk about things you care about," Vincent said. "Your whole face changes. You look happy." "I am happy, thanks to you." Grace set down her bag and looked up at him. "You pushed me to take that first step, Vincent. You made this happen. You made it happen. I just pointed out the path was there." He shifted his weight, suddenly looking uncertain. "Grace, I was wondering. Would you like to have dinner with me? Not to talk about medical school, just to talk. To spend time together." Grace's breath caught. This was different from their conversation in the telegraph office or their friendly goodbye at the train station. This was Vincent asking to court her in his quiet, straightforward way. "I would like that very much," she said softly. Relief washed over his face. "Tomorrow evening. There's a new restaurant that opened on Main Street." "Tomorrow evening," Grace agreed. She watched him walk away into the twilight, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. She had gone to Helena focused on one dream, but apparently the universe had decided to offer her another possibility she hadn't been looking for. Vincent Zimmerman, with his kind eyes and steady presence, had somehow worked his way into her thoughts and wouldn't leave. The next evening, Grace changed her dress 3 times before finally settling on a deep green one that brought out her eyes. She pinned her dark hair up carefully and studied herself in the small mirror. She looked nervous and excited and young, younger than she had felt in years. Vincent arrived exactly on time, freshly shaved and wearing his good vest again. He offered her his arm, and they walked to the restaurant through the warm spring evening. Bozeman was peaceful tonight. No gunshots or trouble, just people going about their business and enjoying the weather. The restaurant was small but clean, with checkered tablecloths and candles on each table. They ordered roast chicken and potatoes, and for the first time since meeting, they talked about things other than telegrams and dreams and medical school. Grace learned that Vincent was from a farming family in Kansas, that he had 4 younger brothers, that he had come west after his mother's death, because he couldn't stand being in the house where she had died. He sent money home regularly because his father's farm barely broke even, and he felt responsible for his brother's welfare. "Don't you want something for yourself?" Grace asked gently. "I'm building towards something," Vincent said. "I've been saving money, learning about ranching. Someday I want my own spread, just a small place but mine, a place where I can put down roots and build something lasting." "That's a good dream," Grace said. "It's modest compared to yours. No dream is modest if it matters to you." She reached across the table and touched his hand. "You told me to start with one dream. What's your first step?" Vincent turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. The gesture felt momentous, intimate in a way that made Grace's pulse quicken. "I'm working on it," he said quietly. "Part of what I want includes sharing it with someone. Building a life with a partner, not just building a ranch." The implication in his words was clear. Grace felt her cheeks warm, but she didn't pull her hand away. "I'm going to be busy for the next few years if I get into medical school. It won't be easy, being with someone who has those kinds of ambitions." "I'm not afraid of your ambitions, Grace. They're part of what makes you who you are." Vincent's thumb brushed over her knuckles. "And I'm patient. I can wait while you chase your dreams, as long as I know you might want me there when you catch them." Grace's heart felt too big for her chest. She had spent so long thinking she had to choose between her professional dreams and personal happiness, but here was Vincent suggesting she could have both. "I might want that very much," she whispered. They finished dinner slowly, neither wanting the evening to end. Vincent walked her home through streets now dark except for lamplight from windows. When they reached the general store, he didn't immediately leave. "Can I see you again?" he asked. "I know you'll be busy with your application and work, but maybe sometimes." "I would like that," Grace said. "I would like that a lot." Vincent leaned down and kissed her forehead, a chaste gesture that nonetheless sent warmth flooding through her entire body. "Good night, Grace." "Good night, Vincent." She floated up the stairs to her room, feeling like she had stepped into someone else's charmed life. How had everything changed so quickly? A few weeks ago she had felt stuck and hopeless, and now she had a path toward medical school and a man she was falling for who supported her dreams instead of dismissing them. Over the following months, Grace and Vincent fell into a pattern. He would visit the telegraph office during his trips to town, always finding an excuse to linger and talk. On Sundays, her day off, they would take walks together, exploring the countryside around Bozeman. Vincent showed her his favorite spots, quiet places by streams or on hillsides with views of the mountains, and Grace found herself falling in love with both the land and the man. She worked on her medical school application with intense focus, writing and rewriting her entrance essay, gathering letters of recommendation from Dr. Hartley and Mr. Crawford, and even the town minister who remembered her volunteering at the church charity clinic. Vincent helped her practice for the admission interview, asking her tough questions and giving honest feedback on her answers. "You need to sound more confident," he said one evening as they sat by a creek, the application materials spread out on a blanket. "You keep saying I hope I can or I'll try to, say I will instead." "But what if I can't?" Grace worried at her bottom lip. "Then you'll deal with that when it happens. But going in uncertain makes them uncertain about you." Vincent pulled her against his side, his arm warm and solid around her shoulders. "You're brilliant and dedicated and caring. Own that." Grace leaned into him, breathing in the scent of sun-warmed cotton and the outdoors. These moments with Vincent had become her anchor, the thing that kept her grounded when anxiety about the future threatened to overwhelm her. "What if I get in and then fail?" "You won't fail. But if you did, you'd pick yourself up and try again. That's who you are." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I've watched you face down gunfire and broken glass without flinching. You can face medical school." His faith in her was absolute, unwavering, and it gave Grace courage she hadn't known she possessed. She revised her essay again, taking out the hesitant language and replacing it with confident statements about her abilities and goals. When she finally mailed the completed application in July, she felt a mix of terror and pride. "Now we wait," Vincent said, his hand finding hers as they walked away from the post office. "Now we wait," Grace agreed. The waiting was agony. The college had said they would notify applicants by mid-September, and every day that passed felt like a year. Grace threw herself into work, picked up extra shifts at the telegraph office, continued her studies with Dr. Hartley. Vincent was endlessly patient, distracting her with picnics and rides and stories about ranch life. One evening in late August, as they sat on a hillside watching the sunset, Vincent said, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" Grace was leaning against his chest, his arms wrapped around her waist, completely content in the moment. "If you get into medical school in Helena, that's about 90 miles from here. Too far for regular visits." His voice was carefully neutral. "I was thinking I might look for work at one of the ranches closer to Helena. That way I could see you more often, Be there if you need anything." Grace twisted to look at him. "Vincent, you love working at the Double Creek, and what about your savings? You've been working toward buying your own place." "I can save money anywhere, and I'll love working wherever I am as long as I know you're nearby." He cupped her face in his hands, his green eyes serious. "I'm not asking you to change your plans for me, Grace. I'm choosing to adjust mine so they can fit with yours. There's a difference." Tears stung Grace's eyes. "You would really do that? I would do anything for you." The words were simple, but the weight of emotion behind them was staggering. "I love you, Grace Morgan. I think I have since you stood in that glass-covered telegraph office talking about impossible dreams with fire in your eyes. And I want to be part of your life, whatever shape that life takes." "I love you too," Grace whispered. And then she was kissing him, pouring all her gratitude and affection and hope into the connection. Vincent kissed her back with a tenderness that made her heart ache, his hands gentle on her face, in her hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "So we're doing this, building our dreams together." "Yes," Grace said firmly. "Together." September arrived with cooler temperatures and leaves beginning to turn gold in the valleys. Grace felt like she was walking around with her nerves on the outside of her body, jumping every time someone entered the telegraph office, waiting for the letter that would determine her future. It came on September 14th. Grace was sorting through the morning delivery of mail and telegrams when she saw the envelope. Heavy cream paper, the Montana Women's Medical College seal embossed in the corner, her name written in formal script across the front. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped it. "Mr. Peterson, I need to step outside for a moment," she managed to say. Her boss waved her away absently, focused on his own correspondence. Grace walked out into the bright morning, the envelope clutched to her chest. She wanted Vincent here for this, but he was at the ranch and wouldn't be in town until later. She couldn't wait that long. Taking a deep breath, she slid her finger under the seal and pulled out the letter. "Dear Miss Morgan, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted into the Montana Women's Medical College class, beginning October 1882. Furthermore, we are delighted to award you the Sarah Williams Scholarship, which will cover half of your tuition expenses for your first year." Grace read the words 3 times before they truly sank in. Accepted. Scholarship. October. In 2 weeks she would start medical school. She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and pressed the letter to her heart. She had done it. The impossible dream was happening. She went through the rest of her workday in a daze, the letter safely tucked in her pocket. The moment her shift ended, she hurried to the telegraph office window and sent a message to the Double Creek Ranch. "Need to see Vincent. Important news. Come to town when possible. Grace." Then she practically ran home to start planning. She would need to give notice at the telegraph office, find housing in Helena, arrange for her belongings to be shipped, say goodbye to Dr. Hartley and Mrs. Crawford and everyone else who had helped her. 2 weeks suddenly seemed like no time at all. Vincent arrived in town just before sunset, riding faster than was probably wise through Bozeman streets. He tied his horse outside the general store and took the stairs to Grace's room 2 at a time, knocking urgently on her door. "Grace, what is it? What is the news?" She flung open the door, her face breaking into the biggest smile he had ever seen. I got in, Vincent, and I got a scholarship. You got in." Vincent let out a whoop and picked her up, spinning her around right there in the narrow hallway. Grace laughed and clung to his shoulders, dizzy with joy and movement. When he set her down, his eyes were shining. "I knew you would. I knew it." They stumbled into her room, propriety forgotten in their excitement, and Grace showed him the letter, reading it aloud even though he could read it himself. They talked over each other, making plans, discussing logistics, laughing at nothing because they were too happy to contain it. "I'll give my notice at the Double Creek tomorrow," Vincent said, sitting on her small trunk while she paced the room. "There's a ranch outside Helena, the Broken Wheel, that's been looking for experienced hands. I wrote to them a few weeks ago just in case. They'll take me." "You already looked into it." Grace stopped pacing to stare at him. "I wanted to be ready if this happened." Vincent caught her hand and pulled her down to sit beside him. "Your success is my success, Grace. We're in this together." Grace kissed him, slow and sweet, trying to convey everything she felt in the gesture. When they parted, she rested her head on his shoulder. "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if I'm not smart enough? What if I can't keep up?" "You'll be scared and brilliant at the same time," Vincent said. "Fear doesn't mean you can't do something. It just means it matters." Grace thought about how far she had come since that day with the bullet and the broken glass. From believing her dreams were impossible to holding an acceptance letter in her hands. From being alone in her ambitions to having a man who loved her enough to rearrange his life to support hers. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything. For pushing me to start with one dream. For believing in me. For loving me." "Thank you for letting me be part of this," Vincent replied. "For letting me in." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Grace gave her notice at the telegraph office, and Mr. Peterson actually looked sorry to see her go, grudgingly admitting she had been a reliable worker. Dr. Hartley threw a small party for her, inviting several of the town's medical professionals and praising her dedication to the science. Mrs. Crawford gifted her with a set of medical texts, expensive volumes that Grace knew she would treasure forever. "Make us proud, Mrs. Crawford said, embracing her warmly. "And don't be a stranger. I want updates on your progress." Vincent gave notice at the Double Creek too, and Mr. Crawford, while disappointed to lose his best ranch hand, understood. "Young people in love need to stick together," he said, shaking Vincent's hand. "You've been a credit to this ranch, Zimmerman. You'll be welcome back if things ever change." On the 1st of October, Grace and Vincent boarded the train to Helena together. Her belongings were packed in 2 trunks in the cargo car. She had found a women's boarding house near the college that had agreed to rent her a room, and Vincent had secured his position at the Broken Wheel Ranch, which was only an hour's ride from the city. As the train pulled out of Bozeman, Grace watched the familiar landscape slide past her window and felt a pang of bittersweetness. This town had been her home for 6 years. She had grown up here, learned here, dreamed here, but she was ready for what came next. No regrets. Vincent asked, reading her expression. "Not even one," Grace said, lacing her fingers through his. "Just gratitude." Helena welcomed them with crisp autumn air and the bustle of a capital city. Vincent helped Grace get settled in her boarding house, a respectable place run by a stern but kind widow named Mrs. Patterson. The room was small, just space for a bed, a desk, and a wardrobe, but it had good light and was clean. Grace set her medical texts on the desk and hung her few dresses in the wardrobe, and just like that, she had a new home. Vincent lingered in the parlor downstairs, reluctant to leave even though he needed to get out to the Broken Wheel before dark. "You'll be all right here." "I'll be fine," Grace assured him, though her stomach was doing nervous flips about starting classes the next day. "When will I see you? I'll come into town on Sunday if that works for you. After church, we could take a walk, have lunch." He pulled her close, mindful of Mrs. Patterson watching from across the room. "You're going to be amazing, Grace. Those professors won't know what hit them." Grace kissed him quickly, earning a disapproving cough from Mrs. Patterson. "I'll see you Sunday. Be safe." She watched him ride away on his borrowed horse, headed for his new job and new life, and felt a swell of love so strong it almost hurt. They were doing this, both of them, chasing dreams they had built together from one small step. Medical school began the next morning, and Grace discovered very quickly that she had been right to be nervous. The workload was crushing. She attended lectures from 8 in the morning until 5 in the evening, covering anatomy, physiology, chemistry, and practical medicine. Then she went back to her boarding house and studied until midnight, memorizing bones and muscles and chemical reactions until her eyes crossed. The other students in her class were a mix of women from across Montana and a few from neighboring territories. Some had more formal education than Grace, graduates of teachers' colleges or finishing schools. Others, like her, were largely self-taught. They bonded quickly over shared challenges and the unique pressure of being women in a male-dominated field. Dr. Bennett taught several of Grace's classes and proved to be a demanding but fair instructor. She expected excellence and accepted no excuses, but she also offered extra help to students who struggled and was generous with her time. Grace found herself both intimidated by and in awe of the doctor. "Miss Morgan, your essay on wound care showed good instincts but needs more technical precision," Dr. Bennett said after class one day. "Come by my office hours this week and we'll go over it." Grace did, and Dr. Bennett spent an hour teaching her medical terminology and proper documentation methods. "You have natural talent," the doctor said as they worked, "but talent needs discipline to become skill. Keep pushing yourself." The Sundays when Vincent came to visit became Grace's lifeline. They would walk through Helena's streets or along the creek that ran near the city, and Grace would tell him everything she was learning. Vincent listened with genuine interest, asking questions, encouraging her, reminding her to eat and sleep when she got too caught up in studying. "You're working yourself too hard," he said one Sunday in November, noting the dark circles under her eyes. "I have to keep up," Grace protested. "Some of the other students had better preparation than I did, and you have more determination than most people twice your age." Vincent brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You're going to burn out if you don't take breaks, Grace. Your brain needs rest to function properly." She knew he was right, but it was hard to slow down when every moment felt crucial. Still, she tried to take his advice, forcing herself to take walks, to eat proper meals, to sleep at least 6 hours a night. Winter arrived with heavy snow that blanketed Helena and made travel difficult. Vincent couldn't come to the city as often, and Grace missed him fiercely. They wrote letters constantly, his arriving every few days with news from the ranch and words of encouragement, hers filled with medical facts and expressions of love she was too tired to censor. Christmas approached, and Grace faced a dilemma. The medical school gave students a week off, but train travel in winter was unpredictable. She could try to go to Bozeman to visit Mrs. Crawford and Dr. Hartley, but there was a risk of getting stranded. Or she could stay in Helena, where most of the other students were going home and she would be mostly alone. Vincent solved her problem by appearing at her boarding house on Christmas Eve morning, snow dusting his hat and shoulders. "I got permission to take a few days off," he explained when she flew down the stairs to meet him. "And I found us a place to stay, nothing fancy but respectable." "Us," Grace felt her cheeks warm. "Separate rooms," Vincent clarified quickly. "Mrs. Patterson has already given her approval. There's a small hotel that caters to families, and they had space available. I thought we could spend Christmas together if you want." Grace wanted nothing more. She packed a small bag and left with Vincent, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. The hotel was indeed modest but clean, with a cheerful proprietor who showed them to rooms on opposite ends of a hallway and gave them a knowing smile. They spent Christmas Eve walking through Helena's snow-covered streets, looking at holiday decorations in shop windows. Vincent bought them roasted chestnuts from a street vendor, and they ate them while watching children ice skate on a frozen pond. Grace told him about her studies, the successful surgery observation she had participated in, the patient case studies they were analyzing. "I feel like I'm becoming someone different," she said as they walked. "Not in a bad way, just different. More confident, maybe. More certain of what I can do." "You're becoming who you were always meant to be," Vincent said. "The person who saves lives and makes a difference." That evening, they had dinner in the hotel's small dining room, and Vincent gave her a gift wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a leather medical bag, beautiful and practical, with her initials embossed on the side. "Vincent, this is too much," Grace protested, running her fingers over the smooth leather. "It's for when you graduate and start your practice. Every doctor needs a good bag." His eyes were soft in the candlelight. "I wanted you to have something that showed I believe you'll finish this, that you'll succeed." Grace's throat tightened with emotion. "I don't have anything for you." "Yes, you do." Vincent reached across the table and took her hand. "You let me be part of your life. You let me support your dreams. That's the best gift I could ask for." They sat together long after the meal ended, talking quietly, hands clasped on the table. Mrs. Patterson would have been scandalized by how late they stayed up, but Grace didn't care. These moments with Vincent, these stolen hours of peace and connection, were what kept her going through the hard days. "I should let you get to bed," Vincent finally said, though he made no move to stand. "You need your rest." "A few more minutes," Grace said. "I don't want a day to end." "It doesn't have to. We have tomorrow and the day after." But Vincent squeezed her hand and stayed. They finally parted near midnight, retiring to their separate rooms. Grace lay in bed, the medical bag on the chair beside her, and felt overwhelmingly grateful. For Vincent, for medical school, for the path her life had taken. The impossible dream felt a little less impossible every day. The second half of her first year was even more intense than the first. Grace and her classmates began working with actual patients under supervision, practicing examinations and diagnostic techniques. Grace discovered she had a good bedside manner, a way of putting nervous patients at ease that Dr. Bennett praised. "Some doctors have excellent technical skills but can't connect with their patients," Dr. Bennett told her after Grace successfully calmed a frightened child during an examination. "You have both. That's rare." Spring arrived with mud and rain and longer days. Grace felt like she was drowning in coursework, but she also felt herself getting stronger, more capable. The concepts that had seemed impossibly complex at the start of the year were becoming second nature. She could diagnose common illnesses, set simple fractures, understand which treatments worked and why. Vincent came to visit whenever he could, and in April, he told her about his progress toward his own dream. "I've been saving aggressively," he explained as they sat by the creek, now rushing with snowmelt. "And I've been looking at land. There's a valley about 20 miles from here, nice grazing, water access. The owner is willing to sell cheap because he's getting too old to work it." "Vincent, that's wonderful." Grace squeezed his hand. "Can you afford it?" "Not yet, but by the end of summer, maybe. I've been taking on extra work, and Mr. Harrison at the Broken Wheel is paying me well." His expression turned serious. "I was thinking if I buy this land I could start building. Just a small house at first, but somewhere permanent. Somewhere I could bring a wife if I had one." Grace's heart skipped. "Is that a hypothetical wife or a specific one?" Vincent turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Grace Morgan, I know you have another year and a half of school ahead of you. I know you'll be busy establishing your practice after that. I'm not asking you to rush or change your plans, but I need you to know that I want to marry you." When the time is right, when you're ready, I want to be your husband. I want to build a life with you, support your medical practice, raise a family together." Tears spilled down Grace's cheeks. "Yes," she said. "Not right now, but yes. When I graduate, when I'm ready to start my practice, yes." Vincent kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Grace felt like her heart would burst from happiness. They were building something together, weaving their individual dreams into a shared future. The rest of Grace's first year flew by in a blur of study and exams. When the results were posted in late May, Grace discovered she had finished third in her class. She stood staring at the rankings, hardly able to believe it. "You earned it," her classmate Rebecca said, bumping Grace's shoulder. "You work harder than anyone." The summer break was shorter than Grace had hoped, only 6 weeks, but she spent it wisely. She returned to Bozeman for a week to visit Dr. Hartley and help him with his practice, applying her new knowledge to real cases. The old doctor was delighted with her progress. "You're going to be a better physician than I ever was," he said, after watching her diagnose a patient with remarkable efficiency. "Montana is lucky to have you." Grace spent another week helping Vincent on his new land. He had bought the valley property and was beginning to build, doing much of the work himself to save money. She helped as she could, carrying lumber and fetching water, and watched the skeleton of a house rise from the earth. "What do you think?" Vincent asked one evening as they sat on what would eventually be the front porch, surveying the land. The setting sun painted the valley gold and purple. "I think it's perfect," Grace said honestly. "I can see our life here." Vincent pulled her close. 2 more years. Then you'll have your medical degree, and I'll have the house finished, and we can start our married life properly." 2 more years, Grace agreed, though they felt both impossibly long and frighteningly short. Her second year of medical school was even more demanding than the first. The coursework was advanced, covering complex surgical procedures, obstetrics, and specialized treatments. Grace was assigned to work at the city hospital 3 days a week, treating real patients with real problems. The responsibility was terrifying and exhilarating. She delivered her first baby in October, under Dr. Bennett's supervision. The mother was young and scared, and Grace talked her through each contraction, holding her hand, encouraging her. When the baby finally emerged, healthy and wailing, Grace felt a rush of accomplishment like nothing she had ever experienced. "That was well done," Dr. Bennett said afterward as they cleaned up. "You stayed calm, gave clear instructions, and genuinely cared about your patient's well-being. That's what makes a good doctor." Grace thought about Vincent's mother, dying in childbirth because no one around her had proper training. She thought about Mrs. Crawford's sisters, lost to preventable complications. This was why she had fought so hard to be here. This was what made it all worthwhile. Vincent came to visit every Sunday without fail, and their relationship deepened with each passing month. They talked about everything: their childhoods, their fears, their hopes for the future. Vincent wanted children, maybe 3 or 4. Grace wanted to establish a medical practice in a community that needed her. They dreamed together about combining their goals, about Grace having an office attached to their house, about raising children who were taught to work hard and dream big. "You think you'll resent me?" Grace asked one Sunday in January of her second year. "When we're married and I'm spending long hours with patients instead of with you," Vincent considered the question seriously. "I won't lie and say I won't miss you, but resent you? Never. Your work saves lives, Grace." "How could I resent something so important?" "Some men would," Grace said quietly. She had heard stories from Dr. Bennett about female doctors whose husbands had demanded they give up medicine, who had been forced to choose between their careers and their marriages. "I'm not some men." Vincent cupped her face in his hands. I'm the man who watched you fight for this dream. I'm the man who loves you exactly as you are, ambitions and all. When I marry you, I'm marrying all of you, including your career." Grace kissed him fiercely, grateful beyond words for his understanding, for his support, for his love. Spring brought new challenges. Grace's class began working on more complex cases, often staying at the hospital through the night when emergencies came in. She was exhausted constantly, running on coffee and determination, but she was also learning at an incredible rate. In April, disaster struck the city. A fire broke out in one of Helena's older neighborhoods, spreading quickly through the wooden buildings. The hospital was overwhelmed with burn victims and people suffering from smoke inhalation. Grace and her classmates worked for 48 hours straight, treating wounds, administering pain relief, saving lives where they could and offering comfort where they couldn't. Grace saw Vincent briefly during those 2 days. He had come to the hospital looking for her, worried when she didn't appear at their usual meeting spot. She was in the middle of bandaging a child's burned hands when he found her. "Grace, thank God. I thought something had happened to you." "I'm fine, just busy." She finished the bandage and moved to the next patient, her movements automatic from exhaustion. "There are so many injured, Vincent. We don't have enough beds." Vincent rolled up his sleeves. "Tell me what I can do to help." He spent the next day working alongside the medical staff, carrying patients, fetching supplies, doing whatever was needed. Grace would catch glimpses of him across the crowded ward and feel a surge of love so strong it momentarily cut through her exhaustion. He didn't have to be here. He had his own work at the ranch. But he stayed because she was here, because people needed help. When the crisis finally passed and Grace stumbled out of the hospital into the morning light, Vincent was waiting. He caught her as her knees buckled, scooping her into his arms. "I've got you," he murmured. "I've got you, love." He carried her back to the boarding house, where Mrs. Patterson took one look at Grace's ash-stained dress and exhausted face and didn't say a word about impropriety. Vincent laid Grace on her bed and helped her remove her shoes. "Sleep," he commanded gently. "I'll stay until you wake up." Grace wanted to protest that it wasn't proper, that Mrs. Patterson would object, but she was too tired to care. She fell asleep with Vincent sitting in the chair beside her bed, his hand holding hers. She slept for 16 hours and woke to find Vincent still there, now dozing in the chair. Grace watched him for a moment, this man who had turned her impossible dreams into reality, who supported her without reservation, who loved her enough to carry her home when she couldn't walk. "Vincent," she said softly, his eyes opened immediately. "Hey, how do you feel?" "Tired, sore, but okay." Grace sat up slowly, her muscles protesting. "How long did you stay?" "The whole time. Mrs. Patterson brought me food and a blanket. I think she's warming up to me." He moved to sit on the edge of her bed. "That was quite something, watching you work during the fire. You saved a lot of lives, Grace. We all did. The whole staff worked together." But she felt a quiet pride nonetheless. She had made a difference. She had been exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. "I'm so proud of you," Vincent said, and the sincerity in his voice made Grace's eyes sting with tears. The fire had one unexpected consequence. Dr. Bennett called Grace into her office a few days later, after Grace had recovered and returned to classes. "Miss Morgan, your performance during the fire emergency was exemplary," Dr. Bennett said. "You stayed calm under pressure, made good decisions quickly, and showed real leadership. I'm recommending you for the advanced surgical track next year." Grace's mouth fell open. The advanced surgical track was reserved for the top students, the ones who showed the most promise. It meant extra training, more hands-on experience, and better job prospects after graduation. "I don't know what to say," Say you'll do it. We need more female surgeons, Miss Morgan. You have the steady hands and cool temperament for it." Dr. Bennett smiled slightly. "Think about it and let me know by the end of the week." Grace didn't need to think about it. She accepted immediately, and when she told Vincent that Sunday, he picked her up and spun her around just like he had the day she got her acceptance letter. "A surgeon, Grace. That's incredible." "It means even longer hours next year," Grace warned. "More time at the hospital, less time for visits." "I don't care. This is what you were meant to do." Vincent set her down but kept his arms around her waist. "We'll make it work." Grace's final year of medical school began in September 1884. The surgical track was every bit as demanding as promised. She spent most of her time in the operating theater, first observing and then gradually performing procedures under supervision. She learned to remove appendixes, set compound fractures, repair hernias. Her hands grew steady and sure, and Dr. Bennett's praise became more frequent. Vincent finished building their house that fall. It was modest but beautiful, with 2 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a front room that Vincent had designed specifically to serve as Grace's medical office. It had its own entrance, a waiting area, and space for an examination table and medical supplies. "I thought your patients shouldn't have to walk through our living space," Vincent explained when he showed it to Grace. "You'll have professional space and private space separate." Grace stood in the middle of what would be her first real medical practice and cried, "It's perfect, Vincent, it's absolutely perfect. Not quite perfect yet, it needs a doctor." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, "And I was hoping that doctor might also agree to be my wife. Soon." Grace turned in his arms. "How soon?" "As soon as you graduate, June." Vincent's eyes were hopeful. "I know you'll want to take some time to establish your practice before we actually move in together, but we could be married. Start building our life officially." "June," Grace agreed. "The day after graduation, if you want. I would marry you tomorrow if you'd let me." They kissed in the empty office that smelled of fresh paint and new wood, and Grace felt the last pieces of her life clicking into place. She had her almost completed medical degree, her advanced surgical training, a practice space waiting for her, and a man who loved her completely. The impossible dream had become reality. The spring of 1885 brought final exams and final surgical observations. Grace worked herself to exhaustion, determined to finish strong. She completed a successful emergency surgery on a patient with a ruptured spleen, performed a complex obstetric procedure that saved both mother and baby, and wrote a thesis on infection prevention in surgical settings that Dr. Bennett called groundbreaking. When the final results were posted in May, Grace had finished second in her class overall and first in the surgical track. She stood staring at the rankings, overwhelmed by what she had accomplished. "We did it," Rebecca said, appearing beside her. "We're doctors, Grace." "We're doctors," Grace repeated, and suddenly she was laughing and crying at the same time. Graduation was held on a beautiful June morning in Helena. Grace wore a new dress, dark blue with a white collar, and walked across the stage to receive her medical degree from the dean of the college. Dr. Bennett shook her hand personally and whispered, "You're going to do great things, Dr. Morgan. Dr. Morgan." Grace held her diploma and felt like she could fly. Vincent was in the audience along with Mrs. Crawford and her husband, who had made the trip from Bozeman. Dr. Hartley had sent a telegram of congratulations, too frail to travel but thrilled by her success. After the ceremony, Vincent swept Grace into his arms and kissed her in front of everyone, propriety be damned. "I'm so proud of you," he said. "Dr. Grace Morgan." "Not for much longer," Grace replied with a smile. "Tomorrow I'll be Dr. Grace Zimmerman." The wedding was small, held in Helena's church with a handful of close friends attending. Grace wore a simple cream-colored dress, and Vincent wore his best suit. Mrs. Crawford stood up as Grace's witness, and Mr. Harrison from the Broken Wheel Ranch stood up for Vincent. The ceremony was short and sweet, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Grace felt like her heart would burst from happiness. They spent their wedding night at the same small hotel where they had stayed that Christmas 2 years earlier, in a room that overlooked the creek. Vincent was gentle and patient, and Grace felt cherished in a way she had never experienced before. They lay awake long into the night, talking about their future, making plans. "I want to open my practice next week," Grace said, her head on Vincent's chest. "Get established before winter." "Whatever you want." Vincent's fingers traced patterns on her shoulder. "I'll help however I can." "And children?" Grace asked tentatively. They had talked about wanting a family but never discussed timing. "Whenever you're ready, there's no rush." Vincent kissed the top of her head. "We have our whole lives ahead of us, Grace. We can take it as it comes." Grace settled more comfortably against her husband, the words still feeling strange and wonderful in her mind, and let herself imagine their future. A medical practice serving the communities around Helena. Children running through the house Vincent had built. Growing old together, supporting each other's dreams, the impossible had become possible, and the possible had become real. Dr. Grace Zimmerman opened her medical practice in July 1885. She hung a sign outside the office entrance that read, "Dr. G. Zimmerman, General Practice and Surgery." And on her first day, she saw 3 patients. One was a child with a cough, one was a ranch hand with an infected wound, and one was a pregnant woman nervous about her first delivery. Word spread quickly that there was a female doctor in the valley who was skilled and kind. Grace's practice grew steadily through the summer and fall. She delivered babies, treated illnesses, performed surgeries when needed. She made house calls on horseback when patients couldn't come to her, riding through all kinds of weather with her medical bag that Vincent had given her strapped to her saddle. Vincent supported her completely, never complaining when she was called away at odd hours or came home exhausted. He kept the house running, cooked meals, and managed his own ranching work without fuss. On quiet evenings when Grace had no patience, they would sit together on their porch, watching the sun set over the valley, talking about their days. "Mrs. Henderson is going to have twins," Grace announced one evening in October. "I'm almost certain of it. Twins. That's exciting." Vincent poured her more tea. "Will that complicate the delivery?" "It can, but I'll be prepared." Grace accepted the tea gratefully. "I've been reading everything I can find about multiple births." Vincent smiled. "Of course you have." Life fell into a comfortable rhythm. Grace worked hard but found joy in her practice. She loved helping people, solving medical puzzles, seeing patients recover. Vincent built up their small ranch, acquiring cattle and horses, improving the land. They worked together on their shared property, partners in every sense. In December, Grace realized her monthly courses were late. She waited another week to be certain, then confirmed what she suspected. She was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts excitement and anxiety. She wanted children desperately, but she also worried about maintaining her practice while pregnant and caring for an infant. She told Vincent that evening over dinner, simply stating, "I'm expecting a baby, due sometime in July, I think." Vincent dropped his fork. "A baby, Grace, that's wonderful." He came around the table and pulled her to her feet, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "How do you feel? Are you well?" "Do you need to rest more?" "I'm fine. I'm a doctor, Vincent. I know how pregnancy works." But she was laughing, touched by his concern. "I'll continue working as long as I'm able. Other female doctors have managed it." "Whatever you need," Vincent said. "I'm here to help." The pregnancy progressed normally, and Grace continued seeing patients well into her 6th month. She finally reduced her hours in May when her belly made it difficult to ride horseback for house calls. Dr. Bennett came to visit from Helena and examined Grace thoroughly, pronouncing everything healthy. "You'll do fine," the older doctor assured her. "And if you need anything during the delivery, send for me. I'll come." Grace's son was born on a hot July afternoon in 1886, after 12 hours of labor. Vincent stayed with her the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, murmuring encouragement. When the baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced, Grace felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. "He's perfect," Vincent said, tears streaming down his face as he held his son for the first time. "Grace, he's perfect." They named him Thomas after Vincent's father, and he became the center of their world. Grace took 6 weeks away from her practice to recover and bond with the baby, and when she returned to work, Vincent took over most of the childcare. He would bring Thomas to the office when the baby needed feeding, and Grace's patients grew accustomed to hearing infant cries from the back room. "You've got a good setup here," Mrs. Henderson said one day, her own twins nestled in her arms. "A husband who supports your work and a baby who's healthy. You're lucky, Dr. Zimmerman." "I know," Grace said, looking at Thomas sleeping in his cradle in the corner of her office. "Believe me, I know." The years that followed were full and busy. Grace's practice continued to grow, and she became known as one of the best doctors in the territory. She successfully performed complex surgeries, pioneered new infection control methods, and mentored young women interested in medicine. Vincent expanded their ranch, hired a few hands to help, and proved to be a natural father, patient and loving with Thomas. In 1888, their daughter Margaret was born, named after Grace's mother who had died when Grace was young. Margaret was quieter than Thomas had been, a thoughtful baby who watched everything with solemn eyes. 2 years later, their second son William arrived, boisterous and loud from the moment he entered the world. Grace juggled motherhood and medicine with the same determination she had applied to medical school. It wasn't always easy. There were nights when she was up with a sick child and then had to deliver a baby at dawn. There were times when she felt torn between her practice and her family. But Vincent was always there, her partner in every way, picking up slack wherever it was needed. "We make a good team," he said one evening when the children were finally asleep, and they had a rare moment of quiet together. They were in their 30s now, a bit grayer and more tired than they had been as newlyweds, but still deeply in love. "The best team," Grace agreed, leaning against him. "I couldn't do any of this without you." "Yes, you could. You're the strongest person I know." Vincent kissed her temple. "But I'm glad you don't have to." Montana achieved statehood in 1889, and the territory experienced a boom in population and development. Grace's practice became busier than ever as new families moved into the area. She hired an assistant, a young woman named Clara who was interested in nursing, and together they managed the increasing patient load. Vincent served on the local town council, advocating for better roads and schools. Thomas started school and showed an interest in ranching, following his father around whenever possible. Margaret demonstrated an early fascination with her mother's medical work, asking endless questions about anatomy and treatments. William was still too young for clear interests, content to play with whatever toys he could find. In 1892, Dr. Bennett came to visit, now semi-retired from the medical college but still active in medical education. She spent a week with Grace, observing her practice and meeting her family. "You've built something remarkable here," Dr. Bennett said as they stood in Grace's office, now expanded and well-equipped. "A thriving practice, a strong family, a real contribution to your community. This is exactly what I hoped for when I accepted you into the college." "I still remember that day I met you at the conference in Helena," Grace said. "I was so nervous, so uncertain if any of this was possible. And look what you've made possible." Dr. Bennett smiled. "Not just for yourself, but for all the women who will come after you. You're proof that we can have it all. Careers, families, full lives. That matters more than you know." After Dr. Bennett left, Grace thought about how far she had come. From the scared young woman in a glass-filled telegraph office to a respected doctor with 3 children and a husband she adored. The impossible dream had been achieved, and it was better than she had ever imagined. The children grew, the practice thrived, and life continued its beautiful, complicated flow. Thomas turned out to be a natural rancher like his father, taking over more responsibilities as he entered his teenage years. Margaret, as Grace had suspected, wanted to be a doctor herself, and Grace began teaching her the basics, just as Dr. Hartley had once taught Grace. William discovered a talent for mechanics, and spent his time taking apart and rebuilding anything he could get his hands on. Vincent encouraged all 3 children to pursue their interests, teaching them the lesson he and Grace had learned, that dreams were possible if you were willing to work for them. In 1897, Vincent and Grace celebrated their 12th anniversary. Their children were thriving, the ranch was prosperous, and Grace's practice was more successful than ever. They sat on their porch that evening, the same spot where they had spent countless evenings over the years, and reflected on their life together. "You ever regret it?" Grace asked. "Adjusting your dreams to fit with mine. Moving to Helena, building a life around my career." Vincent turned to look at her, his green eyes still as kind as they had been that day in the telegraph office 15 years earlier. "Never. Not once. Building our dreams together made them bigger and better than anything I could have accomplished alone." He took her hand. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Grace Zimmerman. These years with you have been the happiest of my life." "Mine too," Grace said softly. "When I told you my dreams were impossible, you said to start with just one. I'm so grateful you pushed me to take that step. I'm grateful you let me come along for the journey." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the valley they called home, their hands clasped together, their children's laughter drifting from inside the house. The impossible had become possible, and the possible had become a beautiful reality built on love, partnership, and the courage to chase dreams together. Margaret applied to the Montana Women's Medical College in 1900 and was accepted, following in her mother's footsteps. Grace helped her daughter prepare, sharing advice and encouragement, seeing herself in Margaret's excited nervousness. Vincent beamed with pride at having 2 doctors in the family. Thomas married a neighboring rancher's daughter in 1902 and took over the majority of the ranch operations, allowing Vincent to slow down a bit. William left for school in Missoula to study engineering, writing home regularly about his classes and inventions. The house that had once been filled with the noise of young children grew quieter, but Grace and Vincent didn't mind. They had raised good humans who were chasing their own dreams. Grace continued her medical practice into her 50s, though she gradually reduced her hours and focused on training the next generation of doctors. She gave lectures at the medical college, wrote articles for medical journals, and mentored young women interested in medicine. Her contributions to frontier medicine were recognized throughout Montana and beyond. Vincent stayed active on the ranch, but spent more time on community projects, helping establish a library in the nearest town, and serving as an advisor to young ranchers starting out. He and Grace took walks together every evening, maintaining the ritual that had sustained them for decades. In 1908, Margaret graduated from medical school at the top of her class and opened her own practice in Bozeman, bringing modern medicine to Grace's old hometown. Grace and Vincent attended the opening celebration, and Grace felt a profound sense of completion seeing her daughter embark on the same journey she had taken. "Your mother would be proud," Vincent said as they watched Margaret greet her first patients. "I'm certainly proud." "So am I," Grace said, her eyes misty. "Everything has come full circle." They returned home to their valley, to the house Vincent had built for them so many years ago, and settled into the comfortable rhythms of their later years. They became grandparents when Thomas and his wife had 3 children, and Grace delighted in passing on her medical knowledge to the grandchildren who were interested. Vincent and Grace grew old together, their hair silver, their faces lined, their bodies slower but their love as strong as ever. They sat on their porch on warm evenings, holding hands and watching sunsets, remembering their journey from impossible dreams to impossible joy. "I would do it all again," Grace said one evening when they were both in their 70s, the ranch now run entirely by Thomas but still their home. "Every struggle, every challenge, every moment. I would choose this life with you every single time." Vincent squeezed her hand. "As would I. You made all my dreams come true, Grace, every last one." They lived to see Montana grow and change, to see women voting and female doctors becoming more common, and the frontier slowly modernizing. They lived to see their grandchildren grow, to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by family and friends, to build a legacy of love and partnership that would influence generations. Grace practiced medicine almost until the end, consulting on difficult cases and advising younger doctors. Vincent worked his beloved land, raised his cattle, and supported his wife's calling without reservation. They had built their impossible dreams together, one step at a time, and the result was a life richer and more fulfilling than either could have imagined alone. When Grace was 78, she looked back on her journey from that scared young woman in the telegraph office to the accomplished doctor and beloved matriarch she had become, and she knew with absolute certainty that taking that first step toward her dream had been the best decision of her life. But even better had been letting Vincent Zimmerman walk beside her every step of the way, his hand in hers, building dreams together that neither had to chase alone. Their story became legend in Montana medical circles and beyond, told to young women as proof that impossible dreams could become reality with determination, support, and love. Dr. Grace Zimmerman and Vincent Zimmerman had shown that partnership meant lifting each other up, that love meant championing each other's ambitions, and that dreams achieved together were always sweeter than dreams achieved alone. And on warm summer evenings, if you visited that valley where they had built their life, you might still feel the echo of their presence. 2 people who had dared to believe that impossible was just another word for challenging, and who had proven that with the right partner, any challenge could be overcome.